to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a Baller.
Welcome in. It's Wednesday, July 5th here on the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. It's post-America, people. This is a post-apocalyptic American day that we now live in.
Apocalyptic, Kyle.
Yeah, it was a celebration.
It's America's birthday.
Do you know how many fires were started last night?
Yeah, hey, I hope everyone stayed safe and no one JPP'd.
As they do, they JPP. I'm joined by...
Fireworks are dangerous, man.
I've told you, I gave you my take before the show. It's not my favorite thing, and maybe I'm a bit soft, but it's just with the kids.
I get it. I totally get it. Kids and especially animals. Like, I guess 4th of July is not as rough for the parents. New Year's Eve is, now that is the worst because you have the people. Look, just follow the rules, right? We should have, as a society, it's New Year's Eve, right? The countdown is to midnight. Midnight, fire them all off. You can have a 15-minute window. You can run until like 12:15 in the morning. Then stop. Then stop it. Like this 3 a.m. random M80 that they're getting fired off. Stop it. Just stop.
That's you, Betz. You're the one firing it off.
I mean, if anyone knows me, I mean that's who I am. You know, I'm out there, American flag tied around my neck, just setting off fireworks at 3 a.m. No, but speaking of, my dog is definitely terrified of fireworks, thunderstorms, stuff like that.
Yeah.
One of our first years we had him, we found out the hard way. We went to a fireworks show, came home, he was by himself, and the house was destroyed. So also not a huge fan of fireworks.
I mean, that's part of the drill is if you're just scared you're going to poop yourself, I'm sure that's what your house looked like. But, you know, listen, it's a fun holiday. It's an American holiday, and I'm glad. Hopefully you enjoyed it. On this show, we're going to be talking about our top 10 Dynasty wide receiver rankings. We're going to unveil them and give the case of a year from now.
We're going to be talking about my roster.
That is true. We're going to be discussing Mike's, which we'll talk about. Mike had a big trick.
Because you said the top 10 Dynasty wide receivers, and I just wanted to point out, it's basically my roster.
Mike's got a pretty fun roster.
Baby!
So we're gonna talk. Like, you know what? Let's just talk about this trade now because Mike in the main Ballers Dynasty League, pulled off a pretty big heist, big deal. But he gave up a lot, and so I want to talk about this.
I wouldn't call it a heist. I would call it I paid the iron price to make a move at wide receiver. So my roster, I've been rebuilding the past couple of years. The league kicked off. I got back-to-back second place, then just kept making the playoffs, and then I could see what was about to happen to my team, so I tore it down to the nubs. And it takes some time to make sure you have some blue chip players getting proper value, stockpiling the picks, actually hitting on the picks, because you don't always do that. Sometimes at like the 107, you take Trey Lance instead of Jalen Waddle, and then terrible things happen to your roster because that first round pick.
But he's still on the roster.
Yeah, he's still in San Francisco. But I had been able to, over trades and things, build up a pretty solid starting roster I have Najee and Ken Walker as my two starting running backs. It's a double flex. Then I had Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson as my two primary wide receivers. Felt really good there. And then my flex, looking at, Michael Pittman, I had over time gotten picks, so I picked up Quentin Johnston and Zay Flowers in this year's draft. Pretty excited about that. But I made the decision of and I still had a pretty strong surplus of picks. I had 2 firsts next year. I have 2 firsts the following year. And I said, I am going to go get another top 10 dynasty wide receiver that I believe is a top 10 wide receiver. I shot my shot for Chris Olave, and that got turned down pretty quick, and like the conversation didn't even get to continue. You know how when you get the rejection, you're just like, no, we're gonna pass. I'm like, you don't like anything in this trade? No, we're gonna pass. Okay, we're done here. I'm not gonna waste.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm not gonna waste any more of my time. I don't blame you. I'm trying to get Chris Olave from you. And so then I turned my sights and, going through other wide receivers, trying to find a team that may be willing to be persuaded to trade away a top 5 dynasty wide receiver, which is very difficult. You don't always have the opportunity, but I went to that team. I started out the offer with a first next year, Rashad Bateman, and Michael Pittman for CeeDee Lamb. I was like, I think this is a strong enough of a start that maybe they even say yes to this, but at least it gets the conversation going. And they respond. They're like, it's really funny because the first response was, the league will be so mad at me if I let you have CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson, and Jamar Chase. And I'm like, come on, how are you going to let the league dictate? But he's not wrong. He's like, that's a fair public pressure case. And then I'm like, well, do you like the pieces? I kind of like the guys, but I'm not going to make that trade. We talked a little bit, and then it shut down. We got to the next day, and I let it simmer, and I said, I'm throwing in another first. So I offered Bateman, Michael Pittman, a first next year, and then a first in the following year. Because I wanted to hold on to my 2024 first. I wanted the chance at the people are talking about the draft class. I had someone else's pick. What if that turns into the 101 and all of a sudden Marvin Harrison Jr. is on my team? Like you get the big eyes. When you're looking at next year and things haven't happened, your eyes can be really, really big of what could happen for my team. But then I made the decision, no, I'm going to make it happen right now. He starts thinking over that offer, mulling it over, and then responds of like, I don't know, but I kind of got an idea. I'm like, oh, here we go. This is what you need in trade talks. Get the juices flowing. Get the other person thinking about what their team could also be. And then he comes back and says, you turn Rashad Bateman into Quentin Johnston, and I think I might say yes to that. And so then I'm like, oh, man. I wanted to try and pull this off without giving up Flowers or Quentin Johnston. I was trying to – it's not that I like Bateman. I still like the potential of Rashad Bateman, but the injury stuff, like Betz, you can talk about that of like it may not happen this year. Because what was his injury? Was it a Liz
He's
Frank?
coming off of a Liz Frank surgery, and he's had some issues this offseason, basically. With the offseason ramp-up, he was dealing with pain still and some lingering soreness as they try to ramp up his workload, so he had the cortisone injection. And now we're in the dark period of like, we'll see how he comes out of it in training camp because there will be no news right now. But even with a fully healthy recovery, typically what results in that is that the start of the season is a little bit slower. And this player, especially for wide receivers and running backs, they gain their explosiveness off that foot as the year goes on. So I still think Bateman can be good, especially if you look past like the first month of the season with all the pieces in play and the offensive coordinator and all that. But now this cortisone injection just adds, I think, more volatility to his early season outlook and more uncertainty.
So, with that information, and I have Zay Flowers, so that was why I was trying to unload one of the Ravens. And so I'm hemming and hawing. I'm like, yeah, dude, if it's Quentin Johnston, Michael Pittman, and a 1 next year, I will do that deal right now. So I sent that over. He's hemming and hawing, and eventually he comes back and says, no, I want the 2 firsts, and I want them both next year. So 2 24 firsts, Michael Pittman, Quentin Johnston for CeeDee Lamb. And, I mean, he called my bluff. Then I'm like, oh, my gosh, that's so many assets to give up. But then I looked around at some of the other teams, and it was, I have a strong team, but can I have a true championship team? If I don't make this move, I made the decision that I have to do it. Again, 25, I still have 2 firsts that year, so I'm just I have a year off of the draft. I still have a second, but it was, I'm going to do it. So shooters shoot, and I'm making my push that my roster is built to win right now. I still have some depth remaining on my bench. I didn't just clear myself out. Like I said, still got Flowers on there. I still have some guys who can play. But now, when someone is matched up against me, they get to go in there and look at the head-to-head matchup, and they get to look at Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb, Joe Burrow, Walker, Najee Harris, and then Alexander Madison's probably my other flex with then my rotating tight end of Evan Engerman, whoever. But I'm like, man, that is a pretty strong starting roster for a dynasty league. And so I decided I'm going to overpay and made it happen because team construction says sometimes you can afford to make an overpay here and go for your title.
I think the context of this league is even just as important. Like you said, there's probably 3 to maybe 4 top-heavy teams that are just loaded. Brooks is one of those teams that's super loaded. And so you're asking yourself the question, obviously Pittman and Johnson can be really, really solid for your team. But you're saying, can I compete against these? Because I think when I saw this trade go through, and I think this is what a lot of people do, they quickly ask who won, who lost, or they want to put it into a trade calculator. And I think a trade calculator would say, oh, look at these first. But what Mike is kind of saying is, I'm willing to pay this price because I think this moves me into a tier in this league. And I think anybody can do this. I think you're going to look back and say, CeeDee Lamb is going to hold his value. We'll talk about him today. And, it's rare to be able to acquire any wide receiver of this magnitude in any league. And so Mike's feeling pretty good.
Who is 24. This isn't overloading and overpaying for a wide receiver who's 28. And you're hoping that they hold their value for the next 2 to 3 years. This is in their prime, CeeDee Lamb. And so I'm pretty excited about it.
I'm going to run some numbers because I know last year CeeDee Lamb, you had to pay up in redraft. You had to pay a pretty high price.
Yeah.
And he hit that because of kind of where he was in his progression his third year in the league. Now he's hit his prime and he's going to be in that for a couple of years. So we'll talk about that with just wide receiver archetypes. What do you get to do with some of these players? Are they on their way out? Or like Mike, he has who I'd consider the number 1 dynasty wide receiver. I would have Chase above Jefferson. We'll talk about that today. Wilson, who we have ranked very high. In our rankings, Mike, these are 3 of the top 5 in dynasty.
I am aware. And that doesn't mean that next year when we do our dynasty rankings that all 3 of them are in the top 5, but I'm going to live in the moment. I'm going to enjoy it.
You could just skew the rankings and just rank them 1, 2, 3.
I would never.
No bias here whatsoever.
If you want to get all of our rankings, you can get those in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus. We keep our things updated, our team opportunity, everything if you want to be a part of that. But we're going to break it down, the top 10 dynasty wide receivers today.
Wide receivers.
So we're talking about the best of the best, boys. It's really hard to poke holes in these guys. So when we talk about them, we can just say glowingly awesome things. But I also want us to kind of say a year from now. Okay. And so dynasty, we usually talk 2 to 3 year windows of players. A year from now, do we think this player not only can hold their value since we have them ranked here in the top 10, but what could change? We'll talk about Jefferson, but we don't know who his quarterback is going to be in 2024. In fact, I think most Vikings fans would say we think the Vikings hate Kirk Cousins and they don't want to be the quarterback.
The Vikings fans hate Kirk Cousins. I think that the team, and I think his teammates like Kirk Cousins, he's an interesting case study of someone where there is something about the human side of Kirk Cousins where you're there's just that radar, that intuition where you go, something is slightly askew here.
The Carson Wentz vibe. Got it.
No.
That's
No.
a different vibe.
That is everything is askew. When a player is on, now not on a team, but was on his third team in 3 years, something is wrong. Kirk Cousins just keeps getting brought back to the Minnesota Vikings for tons and tons of guaranteed money. And he is, I think he's an above average quarterback, but he's an above average quarterback that when things go bad, they go horrifically bad. And that's not, I don't think that's normal for an above average quarterback. An above average, when things go bad, they kind of piece it together. Maybe they don't fix the game, but when Kirk Cousins spirals, it's a spiral down to the depths.
Betz, do you remember that game? It was Cowboys and Vikings, and it was just an abysmal game in the middle of the year where I think the Cowboys put up like 40 points, and Kirk Cousins and the entire Vikings side just like airballed.
Yep, that was not great if you're a Vikings fan. Tony Pollard ripped off like 2 just massive touchdowns. Remember he had that wheel route on the sideline, caught like a 60-yard touchdown with a linebacker in coverage. That's the play that sticks out to me the most.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Vikings in a second, but they just won. They ran super hot last year in the one-score games, and it's an interesting team to project forward, so we'll talk about that. But when we are mentioning top 10 Dynasty wide receivers, I look back since 2018, and it's a pretty fun list of just players that were ranked in the top 10, per ADP. I got to look this up on RotoViz. But every year, we're going to look at players and say, hey, they feel like they are untouchable. Like the guys that we're talking about today, we're not going to poke holes because they're awesome. There's a reason they're ranked there. But based on just numbers alone, since 2018, an average of 3.5 wide receivers drop from the top 10 year to year. So, I mean, we're gonna talk about those today, but that's just how the numbers work. But of all of these wide receivers that were ranked in the top 10 since 2018, only 13% of them dropped outside of the top 20. So they're going to hold value. Like, let's just say, some of these guys, they might drop from 9 to 12. Who cares? Like, that's pretty much the same. If
1
you
to
take
12
out,
feels pretty bad. 9 to 12 is okay.
Yeah, 9 to 12 is totally fine. But there are some massive ones that kind of skew it when you get like Calvin Ridley, like, well, that dude missed a couple years of football. Or Kenny Golladay, who was...
was Kenny Golladay a top 10?
In 2020.
Wow.
Heading into the 2020 season, Kenny Golladay was a top 10 Dynasty wide receiver.
Whoops-a-doozles.
Yikes. So, these wide receivers, they hold value, and some of them are going to gain value, and we'll talk about that today. But let's just first start off by talking about somebody who's just, this dude has held value in the NFL.
Number 1.
It's Justin Jefferson.
Yep.
Before
so you have Jamar above Justin Jefferson.
That's the conversation I want to start with because, in my opinion, I think it's a coin flip. Like I'm totally fine if you want to go Chase. In our startup that we did this past week, I took Chase because I just feel a little bit better about his situation, and the touchdowns are flowing for him. 29 career games. He has 22 receiving touchdowns already, which is just, he has more touchdowns in his career in 2 years than DJ Moore has in his entire 5-year career. Like,
that is so sad.
It's sad.
Man.
So sad.
That's just a little dunk on DJ Moore. So let me open up the conversation first. Do you guys feel like between these top two, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, it is kind of like a coin flip?
Yeah, I think it's, you could make the argument for either one, and I'd say, yep, I agree with that, right? Like, these are two of the best players in the NFL, period, let alone wide receivers. They are explosive, dynamic, and incredible, both as route runners, and in every facet of the game, their offense flows through them, and their ages, right? Justin Jefferson, 24 years old, Jamar Chase, 23. That's what you look for in a cornerstone piece in Dynasty. So I have no issue if someone wants to take Chase over Justin Jefferson, especially because when they're both this talented and their peripheral stats are both just incredible, I am going to side with situation as a coin flip. And I understand, like, Jamar Chase is going to get a huge extension very soon, and so will Joe Burrow. So I know that those two are connected for the next 5 to 8, maybe longer years. And with Justin Jefferson, as we just talked about, he's going to exceed, expectation no matter what, I think, who he's playing with. But quarterback play matters to a degree, and I agree with Mike. Kirk Cousins is above average. And let's say they get a rookie in there next year, things don't go as well. You could see it, certainly, but they're both incredible. I do agree, though, the situation with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase certainly has you feeling, I think, more confident in the longer-term outlook.
How are you guys projecting T. Higgins and the Cincinnati Bengals in your? Because that when you're playing Dynasty, you kind of got to make your educated guess on what the situation is, because I think that the T. Higgins, the points you guys are making about Kirk Cousins is will he be in Minnesota long term? Do they, I don't know, trade for Trey Lance? Like, do something really cool like that. That would help out my Dynasty team. But it's like factoring in the teammates of if the Bengals figure out the finances and they move forward with the core of Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. Higgins is, at least in my opinion, more of a threat than to just target share than Jordan Addison will ever be to Justin Jefferson. I think Addison's he was, I don't remember, my number 3 wide receiver, something like that. I can't recall. But like, I wanted Addison on my rookie teams, but he's it's a big leap to seeing Addison turn into the number 2 that T. Higgins already is and will continue to be should he be on that team. So I think that factors in for me a little bit if I'm projecting that T. Higgins will get that contract extension. Where are you guys with that situation?
I'll start off by saying that this offense, if it rolls, it's just going to only benefit for Chase. Like I just don't look at Higgins in their 2 years playing together has been any sort of detriment to what Chase has done. Like, he improved his targets per route run from 21% to 24.5% in his second year. And he just dominates the type of targets we want for fantasy. Like, he was 3rd in red zone targets and he missed 5 games. Like, his stats are just not real, especially in half PPR. I think in full PPR, there could be a separation if you just want to say, I can bank on Jefferson's targets because, he has the most targets ever through a first 3 seasons of the NFL. So if you just want pure volume in a full PPR, I get going Jefferson, but I just think the touchdown equity and the better offense, I think Higgins only helps that team moving forward. So if he resigns, it doesn't really change Chase and me. If he doesn't, I feel like it boosts him even more.
I'll also add too, like, if you look forward to 2024 at the cap situation for Cincy, they're currently projected to have the 9th most available cap space, so they have some money to work with, and Tyler Boyd's actually making a ton of money this year. That will change next year. He's a free agent as well. He's either going to re-sign on a super cheap deal or look elsewhere. So I think there's a realistic possibility T is there. I can see it as a tiebreaker, but like Kyle said, to me personally, it doesn't really matter, and I agree that the team will roll, and that'll mean good things for both guys. You could also make the argument, like, if they're going to put this much into these 2 or 3 key pieces, which I think they will, certainly Chase and Burrow, they might not have that much to spend on defense. And so this is going down a rabbit hole, of course, but like, then you have these fun shootout scenarios with the Vikings last year where they just couldn't put resources into the defense. They struggled. It was a ton of fun for fantasy. I think we'll see a lot of that again this year with that defense projected to not be as great. So yeah, man, I'm kind of leaning into Chase here more than we talked through.
You got Chase
at
one? Okay.
Love both guys. I do, but love both guys regardless.
The thing I'll add about Jefferson, because like in so many different ways, was such a fun player to have last year. So fun in DFS. Betz and I made some money off him in the betting markets. Like, he just did so well. He busted 29% of the time, according to our metrics. Like, he was held under 50 yards 7 times. And that's the only kind of thing I want to bring up is just he's not as consistent as you would think for being the wide receiver 1. Like, he's awesome. He's amazing. I don't want to say anything else. Like, he led the league in the slot. Like, they can move him all over the place. And he's just really fun to watch. Like, when he scores, it's fun. My kids, they do the gritty. We love it. But I'll just say there's a little bit of fear if there's some inconsistency in just the team moving forward. That's the only reason Chase is a little bit further ahead for me.
Fair enough.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll reveal our number 3. All right. At this next position,
number 6.
That's not number 6.
Number
Kyle.
6.
1, 2, 6.
How about let's go with
number 3.
It's a top 10 list, but you don't know which number we're gonna reveal.
You know what we should do? We should just have Kyle randomly hit a button, and that's who we talk about next.
That would be really, really fun. I hit the button. I was like, that is not the number that I wanted. So, number 3, we have A.J. Brown. And looking back over the last couple of years, this dude has held his value in Dynasty. In 2020, he was the wide receiver 8. Then he was the wide receiver 5, and then according to ADP, he's 4. We haven't ranked at 3. It's pretty hard, guys, to maintain year after year after year of being a top 10 Dynasty wide receiver. Like the only guys in my little data set that I gave, Devontae did it for 5 years in a row. DeAndre Hopkins did it for 4. Beckham did it for 4. Mike Evans, feel like he did it forever. Julio did it forever. But it's like, it's a pretty short list. So A.J. Brown, 26 years old, coming off an awesome season with the Eagles. And now with this extension to Hurts, we're getting to tie these two together for a while. So what is your sentiment, Mike, on just his staying power to be able to stay as a top 5 type of Dynasty wide receiver?
I have him ranked up here. I would say, let me look at the list here of our top 5 that we're going to go through. He would probably surprise me the least should he drop out of the top 5. But again, I have him ranked number 3, and I feel confident in that ranking. It's just of things that could go sideways a little bit for a player. I think that A.J. Brown has a little bit more variables of, he's tied to Jalen Hurts, but he's tied to that offense. What if Jalen Hurts comes out next year and just has a little bit more of an inefficient season, throwing touchdowns? Because Jalen Hurts was, mid-20s already in the passing touchdown category. Dallas Goedert missed a huge chunk of time. Devontae Smith's surgence there at the end of the year. I think that there's a path for A.J. Brown to still be a top 10 guy, but maybe move just outside of the top 5.
Betz, do you feel similar?
I do. And when
Eagles
Mike
boy,
was talking, nothing could go wrong. The Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl. What a heartbreaker. The conversation where Mike was talking made me think about, sometimes I think using like redraft or best ball ADP or something as a way to gauge how the market feels about a player right now relative to these other guys might help us predict who could take a step forward or back. Meaning, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all these guys are going a pick or 2 or 3 kind of like right behind A.J. Brown. And when I feel like looking next year, assuming those guys all have a similar outlook, you can make the case for all of those guys. Assuming that they all perform as expected, I just think about age, right? And if they all have a good season, everyone in their rankings and in ADP is going to say, okay, great, give me Garrett Wilson, who is now 23, will be 24, over A.J. Brown, who is 26, will be 27. If you use age as a tiebreaker, I think that is a case that you could say, yeah, I could see A.J. Brown falling out of the top 5 in Dynasty rankings and startup ADP, data sets. Does that mean he's going to be a bad player? No, of course not. But I do think when you think about players who could lose value for that reason, I definitely agree with Mike's point.
It's hard to bet on players year after year after year that are just efficiency monster. And that's what he's always been. That's why he's really fun. You get a slant route and he just can take it to the house. But when Mike was mentioning, like the passing volume, they were 23rd in the league in pass attempts, but 9th in passing yards. And so you get these huge plays. He was 4th in yards per target, 4th in air yards. He can repeat all of that. So we're not saying that can't, but a change in OC, it's a little different. I know Sirianni's calling a lot of stuff, but Brian Johnson is running things now. And I just would say over time, those efficiencies will go away. So I'm not saying it's this year, 26 heading into 27, but I think a year from now, it would be hard for me to see Arthur Juwan Brown still be a top 5 guy. And I just had to drop that in.
Yeah, I liked it. Looking at it was great seeing him get the targets. That was always the complaint in Tennessee. Just 106, 105. We jump up to 146 targets, a 29% target share. But when we're trying to, nitpick here between these players, and Jamar Chase was, in his games played last year, was at a 29% target share. And I know we're talking about a different tier, but just stay with me. What is the more likely outcome? Jamar Chase jumping from 29 to 30, or A.J. Brown jumping from 29 to 30. Because to me, it's A.J. Brown going from 29 to 27, 28, a percent of the targets where you don't – it doesn't seem like there's room for growth for him. I think that's which we're all kind of saying of he's fantastic, but he's not – he doesn't seem like it's an ascension for him. It would just be a status quo.
So then
also push back real quick too on one thing, Kyle. Sorry to interrupt you. On the passing volume stuff, do you guys remember every Eagles game last year? Like, I would be so excited to sit down on the couch, watch my team for a couple hours, and then by midway through the second quarter, it was like, okay,
sure, that's fair.
We're up by 3 touchdowns on the Giants, so here comes Miles Sanders, right? So and they have a tougher schedule this year, so just for like this year's outlook, if they do have more back and forth, teams push them more, their defense regresses a little bit, you could see way more passing volume to help offset maybe a little bit outlier efficiency.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, we're not saying anything against his talent. He's a super fun player. Just over time, I will bet against efficiency numbers, and I will bet on just more volume. And so that's kind of like the separator from that first tier to here, but we love A.J. Brown. Let's go to the next one.
Number 4.
Number 8.
The number 25. So we have Garrett Wilson at number 4, 23 years old. My question is, are we already projecting that
we're cashing checks that have not been written, my friend.
And I get it. Like, I had Garrett Wilson on a Dynasty team. Mike does. Like, I was so glad I drafted him over Jameson Williams in a league. Like, just like, okay, you could see right from the get-go, this guy commands targets. And that is something in fantasy that, like, we say over and over, like, targets is an earned statistic. You see the skills. You see, like, he demands it. And so whether it was your boy Zach Wilson, Joe Flacco, Mike White, Chris Streveler, whoever else they threw out there, it's clear that this guy deserves the football. The most targets by a rookie wide receiver since Anquan Bolden. So 147 targets is awesome. But we're projecting a lot, and we're also saying with Aaron Rodgers there for 2 years, is that okay?
I'm putting it minimum 2 year.
Okay.
It very well could be the maximum, but I think this is not a 1 year Rodgers deal. I think for the Jets to have made that level of commitment picks wise to trade for him, I think they got as much assurance as they possibly could that Rodgers would do 2 years.
So looking at his statistics, just counting numbers, last year, 147 targets, 83, 1103, and 4 touchdowns. So obviously he can improve in the touchdown department. His line on DK Sportsbook is 8.5 touchdowns. So I think that sounds about right. My question is, are we just saying that the volume's going to be there, maybe even a little bit more because Aaron Rodgers is hyper-targeted, and the efficiency is going to get better? Like, that's what we're banking on for this kind of step to the next level?
For me, it's target share taking a leap and the quality of the passes. So I guess that's tied in there to efficiency of, when you would watch the Jets play, when Zach Wilson was the quarterback, and they would show replays, like where they show the play where you can't see everything going on, and then like, okay, let's talk about that play, and then they just highlight Garrett Wilson torching his defender, just a gigantic window of separation for just an average throw. It doesn't have to be an excellent throw. Like he gave you everything you need, and then Zach Wilson either not seeing him or completely missing. And Aaron Rodgers strikes me as someone who is going to be better than Zach Wilson was. He's going to be better than Mike White and and Flacco, the whole conglomeration of quarterbacks they have there. Despite it being it was a weird year for Aaron Rodgers, which we'll get back to that. But for Garrett Wilson, I think that the player is just so good. The athleticism there, already a fantastic route runner, and if he starts practicing and he gets that true mind meld, which we got to, it's training camp. It's ridiculous to extract from it, but it confirms my personal priors, so I'm going to do it. But the one training camp video of Garrett Wilson running essentially just a straight route and has the head around, and the perfect timing of Rodgers unleashing the ball, Garrett Wilson doing the jump 180 to back shoulder it. Like, I can see that happening a ton this year. And if they get that meld, Garrett Wilson has top 1 overall wide receiver ability for fantasy football, in my opinion.
I agree with that 100%. And when you started talking about training camp, the first thought I had in my head was, Mike, this is OTAs, man. We got to
that's what I meant. Yeah.
But also, I thought of the exact same route, and I kind of get shades of like, what Rodgers did with Devonta Adams. Now, obviously, Wilson has to take a massive step to become that type of player, and we have him in these ranks as a result of that. But when you think about, down near the goal line and kind of how they could use him to really get that touchdown total up, I certainly could see that for sure, especially when you consider the target competition isn't the stiffest in the world, with likes of Mecole Hardman. Corey Davis is a fine NFL wide receiver 3. He's never really done it. Alan Lazard kind of has his role ups and downs as a touchdown guy, but like there's no one in this offense that can threat for 25%+ target share. And we didn't even mention it with just kind of our overall approach, but these top 10, top 15 NFL draft picks that do what he did in year 1 with the quarterback play he had, there's a reason everyone is very excited for Garrett Wilson. I wrote his profile coming out of college up on the site, and I think I mentioned to Kyle, like when it happened, I was like, dude, I love this guy. And we saw last year. So absolutely all in on Garrett Wilson, and Aaron Rodgers coming over. What could go wrong, boys?
The metrics though that you mentioned, like that when we're projecting a player, because he didn't finish here last year, we're projecting him to kind of be here and to kind of sustain that for the next couple of years. You look at his behind the scenes stuff and what we care about, and it's there. It's there with all the greats and all the people that we've been talking about, rookie wide receivers. So let's talk next about the greatest wide receiver, though, of all time.
Number 5.
CeeDee Lamb, the greatest of all time. Mike?
Now, is this, are you trying to take a shot at my trade, or are you actually with me on CeeDee?
Oh, I'm a huge CeeDee guy. Last year,
right.
I was all in. I loved it, and I like the go all in with your team. Now, who cares about 5 years from now, 6 years from now from Mike's team? Who cares? They're probably still going to be great because he has basically 3 of the top 5 that we're talking about today. So Mike's team could still be good then. But what I love about CeeDee Lamb is he was drafted to be great, and he met those expectations last year. Finishes the wide receiver 6, led the league in slot receiving yards, and I love what they did. The only thing I have to bring up is just Kellen Moore's play calling was, how can I get the ball in this player's hands? Let me move him into the slot.
Right.
Let me move him all over. And it's just a little bit different of an offense. So historically, he hits everything we're looking for. He's 24 years old, year 4. Here are the wide receivers with 100+ receptions and 1,300 receiving yards as a 23-year-old. Anquan Bolden, who people forget was unbelievable.
Gosh, he was so good.
So good.
Brandon Marshall, DeAndre Hopkins, some guy named Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. That's the dudes.
That's quite a list of players.
So he's got everything we want, and we've been kind of fading this narrative this offseason a lot of they're just going to run the ball more. Like, he's CeeDee Lamb. He's going to command targets. He's going to get a huge extension too. So to say that like all of a sudden CeeDee Lamb is just not as valuable because there's some quotes about, Mike McCarthy wanting to run, I feel like is just not true. So in your mind, is CeeDee Lamb one of those players, Mike, that you just think, hey, I don't know the ultimate outcome. Like he might not have that 1 or 2 overall outcome, but for the next 3 to 4 years, like you're going to have a top tier dude.
Yeah, absolutely. And you love to see, we're heading into year 4 with CeeDee Lamb, and we've had a fantasy ascension every year. Wide receiver 20 as a rookie. That's pretty freaking good. Wide receiver 18. Now, we had really high expectations for CeeDee Lamb heading into his second year, so that finish at 18 at the time was a bit of a disappointment, but he was just saving it up for year 3 when he finished as the wide receiver 6, and he had to deal with, that's mean to Cooper Rush, what Cooper Rush was able to accomplish for the Cowboys, but Cooper Rush is a backup quarterback. He's not Dak Prescott, and he had to, try and accumulate stats with Cooper Rush for what was it 4 or 5 weeks, something like that?
5 weeks.
5 weeks. I mean, that's a long time of the NFL season to not be playing with your starting quarterback, and then your starting quarterback comes back And that's when he really did the damage and ends up as the wide receiver 6 overall, 156 targets. So I can agree that CeeDee Lamb here is interesting because I think he's appropriately ranked. I have him at 6. The other footballers have him at 5 and pushes him up to 5. He's going to be great. I think he is an elite wide receiver, but does he have top 3 where I just professed I think Garrett Wilson could finish as a top 3 wide receiver on the season. Jamar Chase, Jefferson, that's proven that they can do that. I don't know if CeeDee Lamb can do that, but I think that he can just for 5 straight years rattle off being a top 12 wide receiver, and that has a ton of value.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Not all these guys can finish as a top 3 wide receiver, right? It's very hard to do, especially when you have players like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase in the early stages of the prime of their career. So that's a good point. And being realistic about that is, I think, important. That doesn't mean, like you said, CeeDee Lamb can't be awesome for fantasy. I think he still can be. Just to speak to the pace stuff and kind of the overall offensive philosophy, like Kyle said, like we hear this from Mike McCarthy where it's like we run the ball, protect our defense, score less points. Kellen Moore scored too many points, which is just ludicrous. Like the running back room, we keep coming back to it, right? It's like Tony Pollard is great, and they just got a bunch of random dudes. So like, unless they sign one of these free agents that's still lingering, if you follow their moves, right? They bring Brandon Cooks in, they let Zeke go. That to me almost kind of says maybe they're almost the same as last year, or maybe even a little more pass happy. They were 8th in neutral situation run rate last year. Like they can't get any more run heavy than they were already. If they do, they'll be the Bears and the Falcons, right? So like I'm fading that narrative left and right. Still very much in on CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, you don't want to be the Falcons. You don't want to do that with your life.
Number 6.
No, just hold on here for CeeDee Lamb. We're talking dynasty, so we're talking long term, and the way that I would see the Dallas Cowboys going next year is it's going to be a new head coach. It's going to be a new offensive coordinator. I don't look. I don't know how. Number one, I don't know how Mike McCarthy got this job. Well, I mean, I know because it was lying.
Mike, he watched every game and he studied analytics. Don't you remember?
You get hired and then you admit that you just lied to the team owner's face. That's so insane.
I respect that so much. I respect that.
But to me, again, I'm armchair quarterbacking here. I don't think what McCarthy did in Green Bay to waste Aaron Rodgers' career, have one Super Bowl win that whole time with a guy who's going to go into the Hall of Fame on the first year he's available. Aaron Rodgers will go in. To have wasted that career and be down here, bring in this archaic NFL offensive philosophy, and to me, the removal of Kellen Moore and Mike McCarthy saying, well, no, I'm going to do everything now. This was I got to save my job, and I got to go to Jerry Jones and be like, no, dude, I told you. It was this guy. My defense is out there tired, and I got to rest, and we got to run the ball more. And then Jerry Jones goes, okay, you're in charge. Here we go. If the Dallas Cowboys do not meet Jerry Jones' expectations for this year, Mike McCarthy will be on the hot seat.
I hope Kellen Moore just slays this year.
Oh, I do too. I do too. Just the ultimate in your face. And it's always weird talking about these things because I don't wish ill upon Mike McCarthy, the man. And I know you lose your job. Like, that's a terrible thing to happen, but you're one of 32 positions in the entire world that has this thing. You're going to be held accountable for things. So if his offense is not where it needs to be, and then the Chargers are elite, look, the nerds are gonna have parades in the streets.
You mean Kyle?
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll be right there with him, man.
We'll bring our laptops and our spreadsheets and show everybody what's up. Apparently,
it will be the most organized and well plotted out analytical parade of all time.
No fireworks, okay?
This wide receiver we're about to talk about next. Apparently, I want to talk about it a lot because I've already hit this drop twice, so I figured I should do it one more time.
Do it.
Number 6.
It's Jalen Waddle. Oh, man. Jalen Waddle is a really fun player. His college tape was so fun from Alabama, but it was a projection because he missed some time with injury. But 24.6 years old, he's heading into year 3, and he's been awesome. As a rookie, he was wide receiver 16 last year, wide receiver 7, the 6th most receptions ever through the first 2 years in the NFL. And what's crazy is with a change in scheme, right, with Mike McDaniel last year, he went from averaging 9.8 yards per reception as a rookie, where you were like so frustrated, like where are the big plays, to leading the league in yards per reception, 18.1. So another player with big plays in an offense that we just really like. Like we're betting on this offense with him and Tyreek Hill. Does he feel capped? Like, Tyreek gave his, I've got 3 more years left, but does he feel capped in his ceiling with Tyreek being there?
I think that's an argument that I think you could make. At the same time, like, if this target, tree stays as condensed as it is, there is certainly enough for both these guys to eat, as we saw last year. So, I mean, who is the wide receiver 3? Chosen Anderson? Like, right? Like, it doesn't matter. So they will throw enough, and Mike McDaniel is a smart enough coach to understand these guys are both incredible. Let's get them the ball. So I don't really have any concerns about that overall ceiling. Like, again, we talked about it. Can he finish as a wide receiver 1 or the wide receiver 1? Probably not with Tyreek Hill there, right? But can he continue to be a mid to back end wide receiver 1, even with Tyreek Hill there in the right circumstances? I think so. And these guys that have that draft capital that do what he did with that talent next to him tells me a lot about the player's quality. So I think Jalen Waddle is a rock solid startup pick. But again, if you're nitpicking, certainly having someone like Tyreek Hill next to him isn't ideal when you think about his ceiling. So maybe that's just capped a little, but still going to be kind of like CeeDee Lamb, just rock solid for the next several years.
Yep, I'm in on Jalen Waddle. His dynasty story, which try to remember the path that a player took for their entire career to end up at this point. It has been the most shoot yourself in the foot multiple times with Jalen Waddle, because you had him be one pick after Jamar Chase. So what was he, number 5 or something like that? Number 6 in the NFL draft. And we're all just all the draft community, because it wasn't. I mean, I raised my hand, guilty as charged, but it was, come on. He went to the freaking Dolphins with Tua as the quarterback. This is a disaster. This is such a waste of the talent of Jalen Waddle. And he falls, to the back. I just said I was an idiot and I drafted Trey Lance above him because I really needed a quarterback. But Jalen Waddle was a back half first round wide receiver in most rookie drafts. And we messed up there big time. Jalen Waddle goes out, has a sensational rookie year. He skyrockets in the rankings. We're all in on Jalen Waddle. Months later, Tyreek Hill starts making a fuss. He gets traded to the Dolphins, and then we're all, oh no, I'm back out on Jalen Waddle. Tyreek is here. He's going to be the number 1 guy. Jalen Waddle has to plummet down the rankings, and then leads the wide receivers in yards per reception. And Jalen Waddle, oh yeah, maybe this is what way we were talking about with our top 10 tips in the past episode for startups. Bet on talent. It doesn't always work because nothing always works in fantasy football, but bet on talent. Do not worry so much about the situation, because Jalen Waddle's situation was bad 2 years in a row, and yet here he is as our number 6 dynasty wide receiver.
The way he did it too in these 2 years are so vastly different. Like,
yes.
His rookie year was 104 receptions, like most ever by a rookie. It was a PPR dream. And then last year was just these massive big plays, which we were kind of hoping for. So it's fun to see him do it both ways. And I remember in some of those drafts, Mike, like Trey Sermon was being taken ahead of Jalen Waddle at the back of the first, because running backs usually get pushed up. And so our tip we shared all the time is like, you're looking at immediate opportunity with these running backs that are getting pushed up, but like check out these first round wide receivers.
Be careful.
I think the market's gotten better over the last 2 or 3 years on that. Where you look at it this year, the Kendry Miller, Tank Bigsby, Devon Achane, they were going behind all of the first round wide receivers in rookie drafts. So I think we're getting a little bit smarter, but Waddle just feels really solid. He's super young. Any last thoughts, Betz, you have on him?
No, I think we hit everything on him. We just talked about the Tyreek stuff, but otherwise, I mean, talent, draft capital, it's all there. The guy's great. And
I would say this clump here, Jalen, Waddle, and the next couple wide receivers, I think that tier for me is just so compact that the next guy, and so number 7 and number 8, if people want to argue that they should be number 6, I have no problem with that at all.
Number 7.
Yeah, I'm ready to argue. Let's do it. Let's do. So beyond just
have we won Kyle over with Amon-Ra St. Brown? Are you ready to embrace that
we have
maybe
Mike.
He's just good?
So for all the listeners out there, Kyle and I, we usually do 1 or 2 higher stakes best ball drafts together as a team, and Amon-Ra fell to us. And I've been on Amon-Ra for the last couple of years. I was pounding the table like this guy's gonna break out, and Kyle was like, I don't know, man, it's the Lions. Like, did you see Swift was out? Did you see Hawkinson was out?
That's how I'm
like, dude, this guy's good at football. Now that's how you talk. Now we get there, he's on the clock. We're on the clock, and Kyle's like, dude, Amon-Ra's like 5 pass spots ADP. Let's snag him. I'm like, are you all right? Are you feeling okay, buddy? So Kyle is financially committed to Amon-Ra St. Brown being good at football this year, and I am here for it.
Yeah, I'm glad that he's turning into what could be Keenan Allen. Like, I'm really proud of him for doing that. So Amon-Ra
immediately go. It's no longer about Amon-Ra. It's about Keenan Allen.
There you go, Mike. You hit it right on the nose.
I hear what you're saying.
Let me lay out just Amon-Ra. So 23.7 years old. I think the hardest thing for me to buy into was just, this is a 4th round pick, and it's just so rare when I'm looking
I understand that.
All of the data set and say, okay, but you can also say there are certain outliers that emerge, and Antonio Brown, whoever, that's just his later pick.
Diggs.
Yeah, this guy just gets open, and Jared Goff trusts him, and they scheme him open. Tied for the most receptions through the first 2 years of an NFL career with Michael Thomas, Justin Jefferson. It's pretty good. And you're getting him at an age where this offense is just, they were humming last year. I do question a little bit if they can go as hot. Like last year, they were 5th in points per game, 4th in total yards, 8th in passing touchdowns. Jared Goff. So my question I just want to open up is not against Amon-Ra's talent at all. It's more of, what is this team and what is Jared Goff beyond this year? Do you guys, Betz, do you think he will be the quarterback beyond this year? Or it doesn't matter?
They've been talking about wanting to get him an extension. So if they have a good year, as the betting markets and the general public thinks that they will, in a weaker division without Aaron Rodgers, then if they win 9 games or 10 games and they're in the playoffs, I think Jared Goff's getting extended. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it was only 12 months ago, maybe less, that people were saying, well, Jared Goff's a stopgap. He'll never be the long-term answer. And that still is in the range of outcomes for sure. But they had a good year last year. They project to have a good year this year. So with the OC coming back, I certainly can see it. That said, I think a lot of things went right last year for the Lions. And I can see the downside case for sure, especially when you consider, and this might be a strength for Amon-Ra for his outlook this year, but like they have no talent at wide receiver right now entering the year. Jameson Williams, of course, the suspension, but behind those 2 guys, it's a rookie tight end and no one else, right? So like the NFL has shown us that teams need multiple playmakers to get it done. You see teams like that in the playoffs lose out every year. So is this a team that kind of stays like good but not great for the next couple of years and they sign Jared Goff to an extension and then regret it? Maybe. But I do think they're talking about it, and I think if they have a good year, he will be the quarterback.
Mike, what do you think a couple years from now, like what's his progression, excuse me, what's his progression of, is this just who he is? And we have a rock solid player of, you're going to get near 100 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 6 to 8 touchdowns. And if you knew you were going to get that for 3 to 4 more years at least, it's like, hey, this is why he's ranked there.
Yeah, he's ranked here. I think that's the ceiling case for him. He wouldn't surprise me if he was, 110 around the 1,200-yard mark, and then we see a spike of 12 touchdowns. I think that is possible. They're basically using him like Cooper Kupp up there of, the big slot, power slot, whatever your terminology that you use for that type of a role. So I think that is possible for the range of outcomes, but he needs that to take the next jump where, we mentioned, a couple of these players, like I just don't see a path for them to, like CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, it would surprise me if CeeDee Lamb finished as a top 3 overall wide receiver on a season. It would surprise me if Amon-Ra did it as well. A little bit less, I think, because I think that you could have one of those fluky, huge touchdown years. I have him ranked at 9. So I Amon-Ra, number 7 right now, 9 for me. So he is behind the next player that we are going to talk about, which is far more exciting to me. I think that Amon-Ra is I would love to have him. I think he is. Let me put this. I'll ask you this way, Betz. Do you want Amon-Ra St. Brown as your wide receiver 1 on your roster? Which is a weird question to ask for the guy who is ranked number 7.
It doesn't feel as like when you show up to a head-to-head matchup, like you said, and you're sporting Amon-Ra as your wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. It doesn't feel as good, to be totally truthful.
Yeah.
As if you were like, I've got Garrett Wilson, I've got Chris Olave, names like that. So, yeah, I personally would have Olave, who we're going to talk about next, not to be a spoiler, but I'd have him over Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just think he has more alpha capability in his profile than Amon-Ra, who is great, but he is a slot wide receiver who is currently benefiting from volume, and that may not always be the case. But for the next couple of years, he's going to be solid.
No, I think you guys put it perfectly. Like, I think in a full PPR, I can make an argument. I'm fine with him as my wide receiver 1, but I think this is kind of like where his value's at, and it's hard for me to see it jump into the top 5 any further. But the next player, I think we're all pretty hot and heavy for.
Number 8.
It's Chris Olave.
Yeah, baby.
23 years old, and I can't find another group of people that are more excited than you two. So let's just kick off shoes. Let's just talk about why we like Chris Olave. And a year from now, what's his ceiling? What's his ceiling like rank-wise? What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Betz.
I was going to say, it's tough for me to see him beat out Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, whatever order you have those guys in. So I could very well see him being ranked as the wide receiver 3 in Dynasty after this year.
Ooh.
Okay. That's concise and a hot take, and it doesn't bother me. I currently have Olave at 8, and I'm looking at this, and it's, if I were really in a startup draft, would I take Jalen Waddle or would I take Chris Olave? And
you take Chris Olave.
I think I would take Chris Olave, and for the reasons we talked about of Jalen Waddle kind of is who he is, where Olave, there is a lot of unknowns, but what is known is his rookie season was sensational. Top 5 among all rookie wide receivers in both yards per route run and targets per route run. So that's, Jamar Chase, Jefferson, Beckham, A.J. Brown. He was right there. He was right there with Garrett Wilson, in terms of a per game average, he was outproducing Garrett Wilson because Olave missed a handful of games and yet still finished with 72 for over 1,004 in 15 games. So Olave to me is primed for a massive breakout. He is priced like we're writing the checks that we haven't, we're cashing them that we haven't written yet. But I think that if for any player other than Garrett Wilson, it's Chris Olave for me, and I laid out the case for him on our early breakout show on the Fantasy Footballers. Laid out everything for him, and then hopefully calmed some of the concerns that people have for Derek Carr. Over the last 4 years, Derek Carr has supported at least one elite option, and one of those elite options was Hunter Renfrow. Like, he took. And Hunter, I'm not trying to clown on Hunter Renfrow, but Hunter Renfrow is not a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. He's a very good route runner, and Derek Carr made it happen. And Chris Olave is an excellent route runner, tremendous hands, can beat people vertically, much winning down the field far more than Garrett Wilson was this past year. And so I am madly in love with Chris Olave. I was disappointed that I couldn't get the trade done for Olave, and CeeDee Lamb had to be my backup plan, but Olave is fantastic.
In the startup that we did with the Foot Clan recently, I took Chase in the first round, but Olave came off the board as the wide receiver 6. And I think what I'm hearing you saying is between Waddle, Amon-Ra, Olave, they're kind of just all in the same spot.
Yes.
So it's kind of like user's choice of who you like. And I just think Olave has a little bit higher of a ceiling than Amon-Ra. So, man, it's fun to see a player that you saw in college he could get big plays down the field. And then he was utilized that way last year on a team that was severely hampered. Those games were
Andy Dalton sucked.
They were painful to watch. Really, really painful to watch Saints games. So
Andy Dalton was so bad.
I also think, too, just Derek Carr, just talking about the quarterbacks, Carr gets a lot of flack just from fantasy players and for general NFL fans, which some of it I think is deserved, but also there's a part of his game that no one really talks about. He's an above average deep ball passer. Now, he doesn't do it a lot, but the numbers show when he does do it in terms of EPA, he's actually pretty good. And we saw a ton of deep touchdowns for Devontae Adams last year. So I know Rashid Shaheed is there as kind of the speedy deep threat, but like you said, Olave can be used in that way too. So I could see a couple of just massive weeks from Olave this year where he catches those deep bomb touchdowns. And we know he has the route running to go with it. So I like where he's at in his career arc too with his teammates. Alvin Kamara is on the decline. Michael Thomas is clearly on the decline, kind of hanging on, by his last chance here. Taysom Hill is 31 or 2 or whatever he is now years old. He's kind of ascending and the rest of those guys are coming down, and I could just see him exploding this year.
Do you think it'll take a little bit less to acquire Olave than Garrett Wilson, but we're kind of banking on both of them taking the step this year? Do you think Olave is cheaper to acquire?
In a completely isolated situation, yes.
Okay.
But then there's the team context of the team that has Olave might not be willing to trade, and the team that has Garrett Wilson might have a roster construction that they're able to move on from him.
Okay, just asking for a friend because I'm literally trying to trade as much as I can for Olave right now. Number 9, here we go.
Number 9.
This is one of the players in the top 10 that I get it. I get it at age 29. It's probably he's getting a little too old. I thought he was aged out. He's just a different player. Tyreek Hill is a different player in type where not just him saying I have 3 more years, but just the way that he makes plays. I think I feel fine with him at 9. It doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
Does his age, is that jarring at all when you look at somebody in the top 10 that's, age 29? Betz?
I think it's just not the normal, right? Because when you're talking about all these other guys, they're 23, 4, 25 years old, and then you get to Tyreek and you're like, ooh, 29. That gives you slight pause. But at the same time, if you got Tyreek Hill for the next 2 years, you'd still be pretty happy with that selection, because we talk about it all the time. Thinking about what could happen in the NFL in 6 years is silly, but thinking about what could happen in a year or 2 makes a lot of sense.
I can't guarantee we're all going to be alive on Sunday, Betz.
That's accurate. That is accurate. But I think Tyreek Hill is still going to be great for the next, couple years. If you are someone that really values age and you want to factor it in, I could see it as a tiebreaker. But there seems to be a pretty clear drop-off, I think, in this season outlook for the players that are going to go after Tyreek Hill. So that's where it gets a little dicey, and it's personal preference. Do you lean with what this player could do for you for this year and next, or do you lean for longevity and age? And it's sort of tricky, right? Because Tyreek Hill kind of told us he's retiring, but
doesn't mean
that's
he
a couple
is.
years away. Doesn't mean he is, and it's a couple years away. So I don't have any issues with it. He's so incredible.
He is somebody that when I look at his career arc, coming into the league, drafted later, and then he's been a top 6 fantasy wide receiver in 5 of the past 6 seasons. That's like Antonio Brown stuff. That's what we've gotten to see. And so it's hard when you see players that have been good for so long. Same thing with Julio Jones. You're like, one day this will turn off and this won't be available. But it's everything
Today
you
is
saw.
not that day.
Correct. Like his yards per out run last year were better than Cooper Kupp's awesome 2021 season. So you got insane elite productions. He was the wide receiver 2. And I think for this next year, we can just kind of pretty much copy and paste. And I think you can for at least another year. So I don't see any reason why I would want to trade away Tyreek just because I see his age. He's just different than other players. So yeah, he belongs in this tier.
Yeah, the only way I'm trading Tyreek Hill is if I'm in a rebuild. Like Tyreek Hill is the type of blue chip that you should trade because you could, for a team that's trying to make a push for the next couple years, you could get Michael Pittman, Quinn Johnston, and 2 firsts. You could get a trade. You can maybe get more for Tyreek Hill. I don't know. It just depends on the situation. But so if I'm contending, I'm content with Tyreek Hill. Just I will let him sunset on my bench. Maybe that last year I'll trade him away, but there are certain players where it's okay. Just keep them, ride through the entire journey, and then when the journey is over, thank them for everything that they've done for your fantasy football team. Be a fan of them, and it's okay. You don't have. At least I'm speaking for myself, I guess. I don't feel like I have to always make sure I squeeze a little bit of juice out of the player and try and trade and get some trade value back. It's like just take those 3 years and try to win.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice because I think everyone feels under the gun sometimes of like,
Yes.
I need to try to always extract value. And sometimes it's like, I brought up tons of times before, you and Jason for Dino Jr. have just said, we're going to ride a couple players out because it's better for us to still compete.
It's like Travis Kelce. It's like,
yeah.
What do you do? Like Travis Kelce, how Tyreek has told us, we know the number from him. For Travis Kelce, I think he said he's going to play till the wheels fall off. But when are the wheels will fall off because that is a certainty. But when is it going to happen? And is it worth trading him when you can have the number 1 advantage at the tight end position for the next 2 years? That's such a difficult situation of just holding that player or trading him away.
Yeah.
And I think I would just hold Travis Kelce like I would Tyreek Hill.
All right, let's move to this last one.
Number 10.
It's T. Higgins, 24 and a half years old in a contract year. And listen, T. Higgins, when he's on, and I'm probably talking from DFS perspective, is such a fun player to jump in on because you get these massive spike games that are just really fun when he's on your team. And then there's games, maybe Mike and I felt this past year, where he either gets hurt or disappears. He had 3 games where he left early with an injury. They were all against the AFC North teams too, by the way. It was weird.
It is weird.
So in a contract year, Betz, how are you handling T. Higgins? Because you can make a bet right now that he's going to maintain this, and maybe he goes somewhere else and he gets even more of a bigger target share, or he re-signs and this is just an awesome offense. But do you view him more as a wide receiver 2 for a dynasty squad than, we have him ranked 10, but I don't know if I feel comfortable with him as my wide receiver 1.
Yeah, and I think, I mentioned this earlier, kind of looking at like redraft outlook and best ball outlook, like gives you a sense of maybe this player's current situation and how it could go in terms of what could happen the following year. And there's a reason T. Higgins is being drafted in a tier well below the likes of all the guys that we just talked about for redraft purposes, right? I agree. I think I view him as an incredible wide receiver too. I'd love to have him. If I started wide receiver and went wide receiver again, that's an awesome start with T. Higgins. So nothing negative to say about that. Just that's kind of the reality of who he is. As long as Jamar Chase is there, I like the player. His peripheral numbers are good, especially when you look at 2021 before he actually dealt with injury last year. And you mentioned it, it was an ankle issue that really plagued him for a couple of weeks. Then it was a concussion, hamstring. But in 2021, he was earning routes at a higher rate than Jamar Chase, popping in yards per route run, stuff we care about. So I think he's a very talented player. And I actually kind of want him to re-sign in Cincy. Like being tied to Joe Burrow and that offense, I think could be good for him. And that's maybe a contrarian take of like people want T. Higgins to go somewhere where he can be the one. but sometimes just being realistic with the player, like he's probably more of a rock solid, wide receiver 12 to wide receiver 15 for the next 3-4 years than a true alpha is really where I see T. Higgins. Doesn't mean that's bad for your dynasty team. That's actually very good for your dynasty team. But as far as the overall true ceiling, I just don't see it at the same level as the guys we talked about above him on the list.
It reminds me of, I don't know how tuned in you guys were for this, but the Anquan Boldin, Larry Fitzgerald years for the Arizona Cardinals, they were both crushing at the exact same time. And the numbers of when T. Higgins is actually healthy, Betz, you with the yards per route run and stuff like that, Higgins can put up numbers they're not Jamar Chase numbers, but they are pretty close. So that's why I feel it's a psychological thing for T. Higgins, knowing that he is the second best wide receiver on his team. But then and if you're hoping, if he goes anywhere else, he'd be the best wide receiver on his team. Yeah, be happy with that information. How about be the second best wide receiver on your team, but be tied to a quarterback that's going to shoot for 4,500 yards and 40-plus touchdowns every year of his career, instead of going to being a number one wide receiver on a team with a crappy quarterback situation. I'm with Betz. I think that keep him in Cincinnati. That's the best case scenario for him, and he is a really, really great player that it's the outside story around him that is changing how people view about him. He's still putting up the statistics and dominating and can have these games where he goes for over 200 or not, high 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. We've seen it. T. Higgins has that built into him. And then should Jamar Chase miss a handful of games like he did this year, then you have the upside of T. Higgins becoming the best wide receiver on his team for Joe Burrow. So I am actually okay with having T. Higgins as my wide receiver 1, despite him being classified as the second best guy in his team.
24 and a half years old, this second contract, whether it's Cincinnati or whoever, like he's still so young. Like he's so young that you look at him and obviously you're going to compare him to Chase, but just age-wise, he's right there with all these other players that we've talked about, Waddle, everybody else, Amon-Ra. So
I honestly, in my my quest was for another top 10 dynasty wide receiver. I strongly considered, do I just say, let's freaking roll Cincinnati and go heavy after T. Higgins and have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow and just ride or die with that team's offense. And Higgins was on a team where trying to get him away, the cost it would take, because this was not a team that would be willing to move a top wide receiver, so it didn't work out. But it was in my my thoughts, or just the overall plan of trying to get a top 10 guy. I was going to be okay going and trading for to have 2 guys on the same team.
I mean, I don't mind it at all. And Betz and I, you're talking up our alley with just stacking DFS, everything else. Like, you're just saying this is an offense that's going to roll.
Yeah.
And they're tied together. And Betz, you were saying earlier, like, if they just say, we're going to just pay all 3 of these dudes, then what they're telling you with their money is, hey, we're going to just stay in the top 5 of pass rate over expectation, because they tried Zach Taylor's whatever plan of trying to run the football ineffectively.
Yeah, thank goodness they stopped that.
And then they flipped a switch. So, yeah, it's just a fun offense. It's rare to be able to say I have a team for 5 years plus that I know this team's just going to throw the ball.
Yeah.
And I know who these wide receivers are. So, one last segment.
Take it or leave it.
So when we go through these rankings over the summer, I kind of want to do a quick follow-up of just who are you afraid of dropping most in value and who do you think will gain the most value. So we'll keep this quick. We went over the top 10 guys. We said these guys are elite. They're awesome. But just a quick hitter bets. Who do you think will lose value in this top 10, and then who's going to gain it?
Yeah, I mentioned this just with the age thing. It's Tyreek Hill. He'll be 30 next year at this time, and that is a number that I think dynasty players are usually a little scared off. So his startup ADP will fall, I think, regardless of his outlook this year. And then I talked about it with Chris Olave. I think his value will gain. He's currently a second-round startup pick in dynasty ADP. I think next year he's going to be a top 10 overall player.
I got to agree with you with Olave. I think we're all kind of on the same board there. I'll just throw out A.J. Brown. I just think it's really hard to stay in the top 10 for 5 years straight, just if I'm going with numbers. And then my question I'm asking myself is, will he be more valuable or less valuable in 2024? Will he be the same? And I think that there's going to be a slight, move down in that direction. Still going to be valuable, still be a player you want on your team, but he's starting to hit the point where I go, I could see something falling out in a year or two, just from his efficiency numbers.
Olave is my gainer. Now, the question was phrased in our show, Doc. Who are you afraid of dropping? Who be afraid that they would drop value? Which is now my answer is CeeDee Lamb, because I traded everything to go and get him. So if he loses value, I'm going to be devastated.
And that's how fantasy works, though. You just went all in. You could tell everybody, like, you know who my wide receivers are?
Yeah.
And that's how we invite pain into our lives, people. Dynasty, fantasy,
yeah, what
football.
could go wrong?
That's going to do it for this show. Check out everything on ultimatedraftkit.com.
We'll see you next time on the Dynasty Podcast, everybody. Stay safe out there. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.